Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be using the Smooth Sailing stamp set from Lawn Fawn to create two no-line watercoloring cards. Now, when I first came up with the ideas for these cards, I had a third card idea in mind, but I ended up not doing that third card just because of time constraints. I didn't have time to finish that third card. So I'll just be showing you the first two cards today. The watercolor paper I'm using is hot press watercolor paper from Fabriano. This is a more smooth paper in comparison to a cold press. And this is the very first card I'm going to be stamping. And I wanted to show you the finished card so you have an idea of where I was going with all of the stamping. So I wanted to have everything contained within a circle shape. So I'm using one of the dies from the Nested Circles die set from Simon, and I just traced around the outer edge with a pencil. And then I took some masking magic paper from Gina K Designs, and I created two masks, one for each of these animals. And that's because, as you saw on that example, the animals are on the boat. So I wanted to stamp them and then protect the animals so that when I stamp the sailboat over the top, that the lines don't intersect. So I just used some black ink to create two masks. And then I took just some scratch paper and I stamped out a little stamping guide. So I knew exactly where to place the two little animals before I stamped the sailboat. So I used some washi tape just to tape that to my project. And then I can position the two critter stamps, put them onto the door of my MISTI, and then I can lift that stamping guide and kind of fold it away, get it out of that area, and then I can stamp. I'm using some fade out ink from Inkon 3, and I've tried this ink before and it wasn't my favorite, but recently I've seen so many people online that are using that ink and absolutely loving it. So, I thought, I'm going to give another try, give another shot. Sometimes you try something on a day and it doesn't work out for you, and that's totally cool. It's okay. But I was intrigued. I thought, there's something here. People really like it. So I'm trying it again. So I stamped the animals, covered them with the masks, and then I positioned the sailboat over the top. And I removed that stamping guide and then stamped the sailboat in that same fade out ink. So now I have this little scene here with the sailboat and the two little critters, and I'm going to work on the second card. So this one is much more simple. It just has the two little animals and a heart right above them. And there's nothing else really much on this card except for those three little images. So because the images are so small, I decided to use a smaller circle die as kind of a template to draw on the circle. And then I stamped both of these critters, and there was no masking needed for this one since these animals were just side by side. After I stamped both animals, I took the little tiny heart outline stamp from the stamp set and stamped that right above the animals. It's really hard to see on screen right now because the ink is so faint, but it's definitely there. While I had my MISTI stamp positioning tool out, I decided to go ahead and stamp all of the greetings that I would need eventually for these cards. I'm using some black cardstock and prepping that with an anti-static powder tool. And then I stamped the greetings from the stamp set in Versamark ink. I'm going to use a white embossing powder over these greetings. So I'll sprinkle that on. This is alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. And then I used a heat tool to smooth and melt all of that powder. I then used a ruler guide. I think they're called Cut-A-Line rulers from My Sweet Petunia, from the people who do MISTI. And I use these to trim out these greetings very, very close to the words, just with a craft knife. And just my biggest tip for when you're using a craft knife is very, very light pressure and go over that cut line multiple times, and you'll have a really smooth cut. Use my scissors just to finish trimming these out, and then I will set those aside until I'm ready for putting the greetings on the cards. I removed the masks off that very first card design, and then I'm going to get into painting. I'm using the Sakura Koi pocket-filled sketchbox watercolors today, and I'm mostly going to be using this super tiny brush. This is a size 0 watercolor brush from American Journey, and I'm going to paint these very, very simply, not a lot of color variation, but I did want to show you the entire, well, not the entire, I will be skipping ahead a little bit, but I wanted to show you most of the painting process. So I put down a little bit of color on the rabbit and the bear, and then I came in and added some small shaded areas. And I'm just adding tiny bit of red on the cheeks. Those actually won't show up much at the end here, but I wanted to show you how I add shading into these, and using such a tiny brush gives me a lot more control when it comes to painting these little tiny images. I don't think I've painted something quite this small before, so this was a little bit of a different experience. And even though they were very, very small, it was time consuming. And I've mentioned this in videos in the past that when it comes to watercoloring and no line watercoloring in particular, you just have to be really patient. It takes a long time to really build up the contrast in all of those shaded areas. So I actually walked away from this project a few times and came back to it just so I could keep moving along. After it was dry, I came in with a very, very thin black marker. I just happened to have a Copic multiliner on hand, and I knew I wouldn't be adding any additional water on top of these images, so I went ahead and just used that marker. Then brought in some red, and I'm going to fill in that half of the sails with all red. I'm going to keep this as a pretty flat color, not much shading at all. And then I brought in a very pale blue for the larger sail. I'm planning to cover that with stripes later, so I thought like a really, really pale blue would work well. Then used a light brown on the mast of the sailboat, add a little bit of shading, and then I went into the water. I used a different shade of blue from that watercolor set, and I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to be painting the water. I just kind of went for it, and I really love how it turned out. I'm kind of just making small wave patterns and adding some darker blue areas, and then swishing my brush in water so it dilutes the paint, kind of spreading that around. And I really enjoyed how this water ended up going. In fact, I think if I paint water like this again, or if I paint water again, I'll use this same technique because I really love how it turned out. Only using one shade of paint, but getting quite a variation in color just by how much water is on my brush when I paint it. So I'm going to come in here and start adding some shading on the bottom part of the boat using a gray, and or a black shade, and really diluted it down so it was a light gray, and then started bringing in some shadow areas to really build up the dimension on this boat. So I'm going to add quite a bit of shadow underneath the animals because I really wanted their arms to stand out when it comes to them kind of leaning over the edge of the boat. So I'm putting quite a bit of shadow, almost a full strength black, and then I added that right underneath the lip of that boat too. I used the same blue shade that I used on the initial painting of the sail, and I just used a stronger version of it, not as diluted with so much water. Add a little bit of shading to that very, very top sail, and then I added a little more water just off to the side of the boat so it brings the horizon up just a little bit. So you can tell that boat is in the water, but that the horizon is a little bit higher than it was before. So I wet the area around the boat with water, and then I dropped in a very light blue shade. And I also added more water to my brush and kind of softened that out. And this is how I'm creating a little bit of a fluffy cloud sky. These clouds are going to be very indistinct. They're not, they don't have any harsh lines or anything. These are very, very soft, fluffy clouds. And I really love doing skies this way. I think it looks really, really great. And by the way, this is the same blue color that I used on the sailboat, just diluted down. It looks completely different. I think it looks really, really nice, and it brings in, kind of matches the blue shades. So this little painting's pretty much done. So I'm going to move on to the second card. And this one is very, very easy and simple. I'm going to put a red area right underneath the animals, a little bit of a curved line. And by the way, I did paint the rabbit and the bear at the same time as I did on the other card. I was painting them in the exact same way. So I thought I would just go ahead and edit that out of the video just for time's sake. So I added this red shade, not a lot of shading on this. I'll be adding that later. I'm just pulling that all the way to the bottom of the circle. And then I also painted the little heart shape that's right above the animals. As far as the second half of this circle, I added water to the area and then dropped in a blue shade and kind of softened the edge out, coming to the center of the circle using a wet brush. I'm using the same technique going all the way around, trying to get a really, really soft gradient from a strong blue right at the edge of the circle coming into the center. So like I did on the sailboat, I wanted to add some shading underneath the animal's arms. So I just brought in a little bit of black and then kind of used a damp brush to kind of massage that color and get it to spread out a little bit. And that worked really well. Now I'm going to use some gouache. This is an opaque white paint that you can dilute with water. And I'm just going to add some polka dots onto this red area. I thought this sort of looked like a cozy blanket or something like that. And adding a little pattern to it would be fun and whimsical. So now that all my painting's done, I'm going to prep my card bases. I cut some white cardstock to 10 inches wide by 7 inches tall, and this is going to create a 5 by 7 card base. So I cut 2 of those out and then used my Score Buddy to score these at 5 inches. I'm using a Teflon bone folder for that. And then I used a Xyron Mega Runner for adhesive on the back of the watercolor pieces. And then I just pressed those down directly onto the front of the card bases. And I did that for both of these, just using that Xyron Mega Runner. And then I grabbed the gradings that I stamped, embossed, and cut out earlier, and I put these little tiny thin strips of foam adhesive. This is a very thin, narrow foam adhesive from Darice. These are thin little foam adhesive strips. And I just placed those onto each card. So those are the cards for today. I really love how these turned out. I love coloring Lawn Fawn images with a no-line watercoloring technique because they look like storybook characters. I think they look awesome. If you want to see some more no-line watercoloring with Lawn Fawn stamps, go ahead and click on the link up in the top corner. I'll link over to a video I did not that long ago. And I'll also have some more no-line watercoloring videos on screen right now, so you can check those out. If you're curious about any of the supplies I used today, they are listed down in the video description with links to online stores. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my card videos again. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with another card video.